The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. Anna stood at the front, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her purse. She wasn't used to being in situations like this. She was just an ordinary woman, living a quiet life, never causing harm to anyone. But today, her life had been turned upside down. Today, she stood accused of something she didn't do. Her heart raced as the judge, a stern and experienced man in his 50s, looked down at her from the high bench. Judge Thompson was known for his quick judgments and no-nonsense approach. He had built a reputation over the years as someone who rarely made mistakes, and when he did, they were few and far between. His gavel had echoed in the courtroom countless times, sealing the fate of many who had passed through the doors. He was a man who had earned respect, and no one dared to challenge his authority. But today, Anna wasn't just another name on a list of cases. Today, her entire future was in his hands. The prosecutor, a young but determined woman named Sarah, stood beside Anna, presenting her case with confidence. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. We have witnesses who saw the defendant at the scene of the crime, and we have the stolen items found in her possession. There is no doubt about her involvement," Sarah stated firmly, her voice strong, almost as if she had already won the case. Anna felt the weight of her situation pressing down on her. She had been accused of theft, a crime that was completely out of character for her. She had never stolen anything in her life, but the evidence was there, and to the untrained eye, it seemed like a clear case. Anna glanced down at the table in front of her, where the items in question were placed: a designer purse and a set of diamond earrings. She didn't know how they had ended up in her bag. She had no recollection of even being near the store where they were taken. The judge's eyes narrowed as he scanned the room, listening to the arguments with a detached expression. Anna couldn't tell what he was thinking. His face was unreadable, as if he had already made up his mind. "Defendant," Judge Thompson spoke, his voice booming in the quiet courtroom. "You stand accused of a crime that carries serious consequences. Theft is not something we take lightly. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Anna's throat tightened as she stood, her mind racing. She had rehearsed her words in her head countless times, but now, in front of the judge in the crowded courtroom, they all seemed to escape her. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was shake her head slightly, her eyes brimming with tears. She didn't know how to explain herself. She didn't even know where to start. I didn't do it," Anna finally managed to say, her voice shaky but clear. "I swear I didn't. I don't know how those things ended up in my bag. I've never stolen anything in my life." Her voice trembled as she spoke, but she tried to stand tall. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her. It felt as though the walls were closing in, the pressure mounting with every passing second. She could see the skepticism in the eyes of the judge and the prosecutor, both of whom seemed almost convinced of her guilt. Judge Thompson leaned forward, his gavel resting on the table in front of him. "You are accused of theft, and the evidence suggests you are guilty," he said in a cold, unfeeling tone. "You have no alibi, no explanation for how the stolen items came to be in your possession. Your case seems weak, and your defense, I'm afraid, is hardly convincing." Anna's heart sank. She felt like she was being swallowed by the weight of the judge's words. She tried to remain calm, but panic was starting to set in. How could she convince them that she was innocent when everything pointed to her guilt? How could she make them understand that she was telling the truth? She glanced at Sarah, the prosecutor, who seemed pleased with the judge's response. Sarah's smile was almost imperceptible, but it was there. She knew she was winning. Anna's fate seemed to be sealed, and there was nothing she could do to change it. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, the judge turned his attention back to Anna. However, he continued, his voice softer but still firm, "I will give you one last chance to prove your innocence. You may speak to the court if you wish. But know this: if you cannot provide a reasonable explanation for your actions, I will have no choice but to deliver my verdict." Anna took a deep breath. She had no choice now but to try. She had to speak, to explain herself somehow, even if she didn't have all the answers. I don't know how it happened, she began, her voice shaking. I've never been to that store before. I don't remember picking up the items, but somehow they ended up in my bag. Maybe someone put them there without me knowing. Maybe it was an accident, but I swear to you, I didn't steal them. I didn't do anything wrong. There was a long pause as Judge Thompson studied her carefully. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. The audience watched, waiting for him to respond, but he remained quiet. Then, without warning, the judge spoke again, his voice sharp and decisive. I've heard enough. I will render my decision shortly. Anna's heart dropped as the judge stood up, signaling the end of the hearing. The courtroom was filled with the sound of shuffling papers and murmurs of disbelief. Anna could hardly breathe. She had done her best, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. She was just an ordinary woman in a courtroom filled with experienced legal professionals. How could she, a simple housewife, ever win against such odds? The judge's words echoed in her mind as she walked out of the courtroom. I will render my decision shortly. What did that mean? Would she be going to jail? Would her life be ruined by something she didn't do? As she sat in the waiting room, her mind raced. She had no idea what was coming next. But one thing was clear. Her fate was in the hands of a man who seemed more interested in making a quick decision than in uncovering the truth. Little did she know, the truth was about to come to light in a way no one could have predicted. The heavy doors of the courtroom slammed shut behind Anna as she walked out, her heart racing with fear and uncertainty. The once bustling courtroom had fallen silent in the wake of the judge's final remarks. She couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The judge's words had barely registered in her mind as she tried to hold herself together. I will render my decision shortly, he had said, but that meant nothing to Anna right now. She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear the consequences of this nightmare. She sat down in the cold waiting room, her hands clenched into tight fists. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and questions. How could this be happening? How had she gone from being the simple woman with a peaceful life to being accused of a crime she hadn't committed? She couldn't remember ever being near the store, let alone taking anything. But the evidence was there. The earrings and the purse, the witnesses who had seen her. How could she explain it? As the minutes ticked by, the knot in her stomach tightened. She was alone in the room, with only her thoughts for company. The weight of the situation felt unbearable, and the uncertainty of what would happen next hung in the air like a dark cloud. She closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. Her mind wandered to her family, to her husband, and to the life they had built together. Anna knew her husband was a kind man. He was quiet, humble, and worked in the background of the legal world. He wasn't a person who sought attention, but today she wished she could turn to him for help. She had married David, a respected lawyer, many years ago. He was the calm to her storm, the anchor in her life. They had a simple, happy life together, far removed from the chaos of the courtroom. But Anna knew that David had a secret that few knew about. He was more than just a lawyer. He was also a Supreme Court justice, a man with immense influence and power in the legal world. Anna had always kept his position a secret from her friends and the people around her. She had never used his status for personal gain. But today, she was beginning to realize that she might have to. As Anna sat there in the waiting room, her hands trembling, she thought of calling David. But what would she say? She couldn't bring herself to involve him in this mess. He had enough to worry about with his own cases, and she didn't want to burden him with her problems. But as the weight of the moment settled in, Anna began to wonder if she had any other choice. Just then, the door to the waiting room opened, and a court officer walked in with a stern expression. Anna's heart skipped a beat. "Ma'am, the judge has made his decision," the officer said, his voice cold and formal. Anna stood up quickly, her legs shaking beneath her. Is it time for the verdict?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The officer nodded. Yes, you'll be called in shortly." The officer turned to leave, but Anna stopped him. She knew this was her last chance to make a move. "Can I make a phone call?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. The officer looked at her for a moment, then shrugged. "You can make one phone call. You'll have to make it quickly." Anna quickly stepped toward the officer, her mind already racing. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number she knew by heart. The phone rang several times before it was picked up. "Hello." David's calm voice echoed through the speaker. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She was so relieved to hear his voice. "David," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I need your help. I don't know what to do. They think I stole something. They're about to announce the verdict. I can't do this alone." David's voice softened immediately. "Anna, listen to me. We'll get through this. You're not alone. What exactly happened?" As Anna explained the details of the case to her husband, she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. David's calm demeanor soothed her, even though she knew he had no idea just how deep the trouble was. She was still uncertain about what had happened to her, but hearing his voice gave her the courage she needed to push forward. "Okay," David said after a moment of silence. "I want you to stay calm. I'll be there soon. Don't make any hasty decisions. Wait for my call." Anna's heart skipped. "Wait for your call." "But, David, you're not alone," he interrupted, his voice firm and reassuring. "Just wait. You'll see." Before Anna could respond, the line went dead. She stared at her phone for a moment, her mind still racing. What did he mean by that? Wait for his call. What was he going to do? As much as she wanted to press him for answers, Anna knew that David was in control. If he said to wait, she would. Just then, the courtroom officer returned, signaling that it was time. "Ma'am, the judge is ready to render his decision," he said, his tone giving nothing away. Anna nodded, her heart pounding as she followed the officer back into the courtroom. She had no idea what was coming, but her nerves were now on edge. This was it, the moment of truth. She had done everything she could to explain herself, but the decision was out of her hands now. As Anna walked back into the courtroom, she took her seat once again. The judge, with his stern expression, looked down at her from the bench. The prosecutor, Sarah, stood at attention, ready to hear the judge's words. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric, as everyone waited for the decision to be announced. "Anna," Judge Thompson began, his voice low and deliberate, "I have heard your defense, and after careful consideration, I have come to a conclusion." Anna's breath hitched in her chest. She didn't know what to expect, but she was preparing herself for the worst. Her mind was still spinning from the phone call with David. She had to believe that he would be able to do something. But would it be enough? "I am ready to announce the verdict," the judge continued. "But before I do, I would like to give you one more chance to speak. Do you have anything else to add?" Anna's heart raced as she glanced at the judge. Her thoughts were clouded with uncertainty. She wanted to say something, but what could she possibly say at this point? She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was as if she had been struck dumb by the weight of the situation. But then, she remembered David's words. "Wait for my call." A sudden rush of clarity filled Anna. She knew what she had to do. Without hesitation, she stood up and addressed the judge. "I would like to make one final request," she said, her voice steady and firm. "I would like to make a phone call to my husband. He is a Supreme Court justice, and I believe he can help clarify this situation." The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at her, their expressions a mixture of confusion and disbelief. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by the sudden revelation. "Your husband is a Supreme Court justice?" he asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Anna nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, he is, Your Honor." The judge looked at her for a moment longer, clearly weighing the implications of this new information. Then, with a slight nod, he gave his approval. "You may make the call," he said, but I expect you to be quick." As Anna pulled out her phone, she couldn't help but feel a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in hours. Her husband was a powerful man, and perhaps now, with his intervention, things would finally begin to change. She dialed David's number, holding her breath as the phone rang. The courtroom was tense with anticipation. Everyone in the room could feel the weight of Anna's revelation, the fact that her husband, the quiet and unassuming David, was a Supreme Court justice. The judge, still seated on his elevated bench, regarded Anna with a mix of curiosity and skepticism, unsure whether to take her claims seriously. The prosecutor, Sarah, shifted uncomfortably, her composed demeanor now faltering slightly. And the audience, well, they waited, breathless, wondering if this would be the twist that could change everything. Anna's heart pounded as she dialed her husband's number, her fingers shaking ever so slightly. It felt surreal, as though she were watching her own life unfold from a distance. She had never, in a million years, thought she would find herself in a courtroom, fighting not just for her innocence, but for the very foundation of the life she and David had carefully built together. She had always kept his position secret, knowing how much attention it would attract if anyone knew. Now, however, Anna had to use that secret for her survival. The phone rang, and every passing second felt like an eternity. When David's calm, reassuring voice finally came through, Anna exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. "David, it's me," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of the moment. "I'm in the courtroom. The judge is about to announce his verdict. I told them about you. I told them you're a Supreme Court justice. Please, you have to help me." David's voice was steady, as it always was, but there was a sense of urgency now that Anna hadn't heard before. "Anna, listen to me," he said, his words clear and deliberate. "I'm on my way. Don't say anything more. I'll take care of this. Just stay calm, okay?" Anna felt the tightness in her chest loosen ever so slightly. Her husband was the rock she had always relied on, and now his calm presence was like a lifeline in the storm that had swept over her life. "I'm waiting for your call," she whispered, her voice barely audible, filled with hope and fear in equal measure. "I'll just—" Before she could finish, David cut in, his voice firm but reassuring. "I'll handle it from here. Just stay strong. You'll see." The phone call ended abruptly, and Anna was left holding her breath, wondering if it was too late, if David could make a difference in the situation she had found herself in. She turned to face the judge, her heart still racing. The entire courtroom was staring at her, waiting for the next move. No one seemed to know what to think of her sudden admission. For a moment, the room fell into complete silence. The judge, after a long pause, cleared his throat. His expression was unreadable, though his eyebrows were furrowed with curiosity. He shifted his papers, and then, looking at Anna with newfound scrutiny, he spoke. "Very well," Judge Thompson said, his voice gravelly. "You claim your husband is a Supreme Court justice. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. However, I will not allow this to interfere with the proceedings. If your claim is true, it could have serious ramifications. But until then, we proceed as normal." Anna nodded, though she could feel the nerves creeping back into her bones. She had revealed a part of her life she had kept private for years, and now, the repercussions were out of her control. The room seemed to close in on her again, and her pulse raced as the seconds stretched on, each one feeling longer than the last. She sat back down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The judge's words echoed in her mind. "I'll give you the benefit of the doubt." Anna wasn't sure whether she should be relieved or nervous. Would David really be able to do anything? Was this revelation enough to change the course of the trial, or would it only make things more complicated? Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Just as Anna's anxiety reached its peak, the courtroom door opened with a soft creak. Heads turned, and the quiet murmur of the audience filled the air. Anna's heart skipped a beat as she saw David enter the room. He walked with quiet confidence, his head held high, his every step measured and purposeful. David was a tall man, with neatly combed brown hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Despite his position as a Supreme Court justice, he always carried himself with humility and grace. He was the type of person who never sought attention, but when he spoke, people listened. As he approached the front of the courtroom, all eyes were on him. The judge's eyes widened slightly, though his face remained stoic. It was clear that David's presence was unexpected. "Your Honor," David began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I believe this case requires immediate attention from the highest levels of the judiciary. I have been made aware of the circumstances surrounding my wife's situation, and I must request that the proceedings be halted for further investigation." There was a collective gasp in the room. The prosecutor, Sarah, looked both surprised and flustered, unsure of how to respond. Anna, on the other hand, felt a wave of relief wash over her. David had arrived. His steady presence alone seemed to bring a sense of order to the chaos. Judge Thompson looked at David for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his tone stern but respectful. "Mr. David Lawson, Supreme Court Justice, I presume. This is highly irregular. I had no knowledge that you were involved in this case." David nodded slightly. "I did not wish to make my position public, but the circumstances now demand it. I am here to ensure that my wife is afforded the due process she deserves, and that justice is served." Anna watched as the judge mulled over David's words. He was clearly taken aback by the unexpected turn of events. Finally, he set his gavel down, signaling for the court to be quiet. "This is an extraordinary situation," Judge Thompson said slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But I will honor your request, Mr. Lawson. We will take a recess to review the matter further." As the judge called for a break in the proceedings, Anna felt a sense of shock and awe. This was really happening. David's intervention had brought the courtroom to a halt, and she could only imagine the weight his status as a Supreme Court justice carried. David turned to Anna, offering her a reassuring smile. "It's going to be okay. We'll get through this." Anna tried to smile back, though her heart was still heavy with uncertainty. She had never expected this to be the outcome of her ordinary life. It had all started with a simple mistake, a misunderstanding, and now it was spiraling into something much bigger. But with David by her side, she couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. The recess lasted only a few minutes, but to Anna, it felt like an eternity. When the judge finally returned, his demeanor had changed. His earlier confidence had been replaced by something else, something akin to respect, perhaps even fear. The Supreme Court Justice, David Lawson, had come to his wife's defense, and that had changed everything. Judge Thompson raised his gavel and spoke clearly, his voice carrying through the now quiet courtroom. "This case will be reviewed immediately by the highest legal authorities. We will adjourn for further investigation into the matter at hand." Anna's breath caught in her throat. The tide had turned. The very moment she had been waiting for had arrived. Justice, it seemed, was finally on her side. As the courtroom cleared, Anna found herself standing there, facing her husband. She took a deep breath and looked up at him. The man who had always stood in the background, never seeking the spotlight, was now her savior. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you." David smiled softly, his eyes warm. "You didn't have to do anything. I'll always be here for you, Anna, no matter what." And as Anna stood there, feeling the weight of everything she had just revealed, she realized that the trial wasn't over. It was only just beginning. But now, with her husband's power and influence in the highest court, she finally had a fighting chance. The truth would come to light, and Anna was ready for whatever came next. The courtroom was buzzing with tension as the break came to an end. The brief recess had given Anna just enough time to breathe, but she couldn't shake the sense of dread that still clung to her. The whole situation had spiraled far beyond anything she had ever imagined. Her mind raced, replaying the events that had led her here. An innocent woman, caught in a web of false accusations and an unimaginable twist of fate. David's presence had shifted the balance in her favor, but the road ahead still seemed long and uncertain. She was thankful for his support, but a nagging feeling remained in the pit of her stomach. She knew that no matter what happened next, she couldn't change the fact that her life had been turned upside down. The past few days had been a blur, moments of fear, confusion, and helplessness. She had never imagined her life would come to this. But now, with her husband's influence in the courtroom, perhaps there was hope for redemption. The air in the courtroom was heavy with expectation as everyone returned to their seats. The prosecutor, Sarah, was still composed, but there was an unmistakable edge to her demeanor. She had no doubt that David's sudden arrival had thrown a wrench into her carefully constructed case, but she wasn't going to back down without a fight. Judge Thompson entered the room, his face stern but thoughtful. He didn't give any outward sign of the decision he was about to render. His eyes scanned the room, acknowledging the quiet murmurs before he motioned for silence. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, silencing the courtroom. "We are back in session," the judge announced, his voice low but commanding. "I have reviewed the circumstances surrounding this case and have consulted with the necessary legal authorities." The room fell into a hushed silence, and Anna's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel every eye in the courtroom on her. The weight of the moment was almost unbearable, and yet she remained still, hoping beyond hope that justice would prevail. She knew she couldn't control the outcome, but a part of her felt that maybe, just maybe, the truth would come to light. "I understand that there are some extraordinary circumstances in this case," Judge Thompson continued, his gaze flicking briefly to David, who sat beside Anna, his presence both comforting and commanding. "The involvement of Mr. David Lawson, a Supreme Court justice, has certainly added a layer of complexity. However, the law must be followed, and the facts must be weighed carefully." Anna's fingers gripped the edge of her seat as she held her breath, waiting for the verdict that would change everything. The judge turned his attention back to her, his face neutral. "Anna Lawson, you stand accused of theft. The evidence against you was strong. There were witnesses, physical evidence, and circumstances that seemed to point directly to you. However, after careful consideration and further review of the facts, I have come to a conclusion." For a moment, it felt as though the entire world had frozen. Time seemed to stretch on, each second a heavy weight pressing down on Anna's chest. She could feel her heart racing, her pulse pounding in her ears. It was as if every fiber of her being was focused on this one moment, the moment that would determine her fate. "I find that the evidence presented does not fully support the claim that you are guilty of the crime for which you are accused," Judge Thompson continued, his voice steady but firm. "There is insufficient proof to convict you beyond a reasonable doubt." Anna's breath caught in her throat as she processed the words. Could it be true? Could she really be free from this nightmare? "I am dismissing all charges against you, Anna Lawson," the judge declared, his gavel coming down with a resounding thud. "You are hereby cleared of all accusations." The courtroom erupted in a mix of gasps and murmurs. Anna's mind raced as she tried to process the judge's words. She had been acquitted. She was free. The weight of the past few days seemed to lift off her shoulders in that instant, replaced by a surge of disbelief and overwhelming relief. Tears welled up in her eyes as she turned to David. He was watching her, his expression calm, but there was a glimmer of pride in his eyes. He reached out and gently took her hand, offering her the support she had desperately needed through the entire ordeal. "You did it," Anna whispered, her voice trembling. "We did it." David gave her a soft smile, his grip tightening on her hand. "No, Anna. You did it. You stood strong, and you never gave up. That's what matters." The emotions overwhelmed her as she looked back at the judge, her heart still racing. The sense of finality was still sinking in. This nightmare was finally over. She was no longer a woman accused, no longer a suspect in a crime she hadn't committed. She was free to go back to her life, to rebuild what had been shaken. But as Anna stood up from her seat, she couldn't help but look around the courtroom, trying to absorb everything that had happened. This was more than just an acquittal. This was a moment of redemption, a moment when the truth had finally been recognized. It wasn't just the legal victory that mattered. It was the fact that justice had been served, that the system had worked in the end. The judge's voice cut through her thoughts. "I would like to remind everyone that the law is impartial. We cannot let personal connections cloud our judgment." This case was a reminder of how easily lives can be disrupted by false accusations and how important it is that justice prevails above all else. Anna nodded, understanding the significance of the judge's words. This case was far from ordinary. It was a reminder of the delicate balance between truth and perception, and how one wrong move could change everything. But in the end, the truth had triumphed. As she walked out of the courtroom with David by her side, Anna felt a sense of peace settle over her. The weight that had crushed her chest for days had finally lifted, and though she knew there would still be challenges ahead, she was ready to face them with a newfound strength. Outside the courtroom, the bright sunlight hit her face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Anna felt the warmth of hope. She had been through the fire, and she had come out the other side. There were no more accusations hanging over her head. She was no longer a victim of circumstances beyond her control. She was free. "Thank you, David," Anna said again, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you." David smiled at her, his eyes filled with affection. "You don't need to thank me, Anna. I would do anything for you. I always have, and I always will." For a moment, they stood there in silence, their hands intertwined, taking in the weight of the journey they had just completed. The future was uncertain, but they had weathered the storm together, and that was all that mattered. As they walked away from the courthouse, Anna couldn't help but feel that the story wasn't over. It had been a long road, but she had learned something valuable through it all. Justice might be slow, but it always finds its way in the end. And in the end, the truth had set her free.